So welcome to this Everyday Genius interview. Today I'm with Mehrnaz Bassiri. Mehrnaz is a poet, an educator, and a progress specialist. She's been featured in TED, Thrive Global, HuffPost, and Maclean's, and is driven by a commitment to self-discovery and personal growth, which is why you're here. She uses poetry as a medium for introspection and resilience building, and her poetry has been published in the Healing Muse, Inscape Journal, Drishti Magazine, and the Bombay Review. Mehrnaz, welcome. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Simon. It's great to be here.
So pleased. So as you know, the purpose of this is really to get to know a little bit about you and your creative process. And it's really, in a way, an antidote to the prevailing view that there is one single way that we have to know, that science is going to find, I'm not against science, by the way, but science is going to find the one true way, and or this leader is going to find the one true way, or this coach or whatever. And what I really want to do is support us find your own way, and hence having a lovely conversation with somebody like you, who I really feel embodies, from what I've seen of your work, some of this expression. So thank you very much for being here. My first question to you is, could you share something about a time in your life where you felt you've really been in that creative space, really flowing fully? Just share a little bit about that.
It's actually really funny that you mention science in our creative work because, ironically,
Mm,
the time that I've been the most creative in my life was between 2021 to 2023. And that is the time that I was having a major personal crisis.
right.
And I was diagnosed with major trauma during that time. And I was feeling so sick that I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything that I enjoyed doing. And one day, in sheer frustration of that and fear of not knowing when I was going to get better or if I was going to get better, I just took a pen and paper and started writing poem. And it was my way of expressing all that fear and anxiety and everything that was going on. And to my surprise, it didn't make me feel sicker than I was because at that point, my brain was so foggy and it was so inaccessible that even writing a simple email made me feel ill. So it was really surprising to me that I had written this whole poem and I was feeling okay. I was feeling fine. So then I started to write another poem. And after that, again, I felt okay. And that marked the beginning of me documenting my healing process through poetry. And I had heard the term or the phrase, go with your heart, follow your heart before, but I didn't know what it meant exactly until my heart center became the place that I could make decisions from. And that's the place that the poetry was flowing through. So I was bypassing using my brain, which was basically out of commission at that point. And through that, I was able to create over 100 poems, some of which I'm now collecting into a book to be published this year, later this year.
So can you say a little bit more about that heart space, how you actually experience it? You said you write poetry from there, and just could you say a little bit more about the actual experience of it?
Yeah, when I write poetry, I notice that my I am very calm. My brain space, I'm not, it's not coming through the brain. I don't need my brain to write poetry. It's all coming from this heart center through emotions and through expression of feelings. And it's a very new thing for me because I have a science background. I did my
Right.
master's in chemistry. So all my life I was trained to use my brain as the logical thinking center. And this poetry writing flipped that completely. And now I'm trying to actually make decisions more from my heart
Yeah.
down from my brain. And the way I practice is through writing poetry. And I try to integrate uh, that place of thinking in other areas of my life. And I find that it's a lot simpler to make decisions from the heart. It's a lot faster. It's more reliable as well. So it's just something interesting that I've found in the last 3 years.
Simpler, more reliable, and you used one other word
Um,
for making decisions from the heart.
Simpler, reliable, and I can't remember what I said, but simpler, more reliable, and it's just a lot easier. It's like you know the answer, you know?
Yeah.
All of us know the answer already. We just have to bring it out. And thinking through the heart center is that's how I found that I can bring that out of me.
Ah, so lovely to hear that. So that's such a trite way to put it. The problem is I've got so many different things going through my mind in response to what you're saying. I think you know how well, firstly, how did you actually find your way to poetry? In that, like, that's a very dark time where that brain fog is going on, and you said you were kind of surprised that you could do it and it didn't have a negative effect on it. How did you actually land on doing something which seemed so, I don't know, against what you needed in a way?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because as a scientist, I've always wanted to document
Mm.
things, processes that I go through in life. And even when I had my breakdown, as scary as it was, I really wanted to get to the root of the problem. So I actually opted against using medication because I really wanted to understand how my body and my brain were communicating with me. So I needed to feel everything. I needed to let everything just be for me to actually start to understand what my body was trying to tell me. So having decided that, I started to document what I was feeling. And like I said before, even typing a little bit, a small paragraph made me feel really ill, especially when you're working on your trauma and you have to go back to memories that might be painful and not very fun to think about. It made me feel really ill to just write it in a paragraph form and document it in that way. So I stopped doing that, but I really, really wanted to document this process so that hopefully when I got better, I could be of service to other people. Um, so I was looking for short ways that I could just dip into my trauma and then come back out.
Yes.
Little jolts like that, jumping into it and then coming out before it made me feel ill. And poetry became the way that I could do that because every poem, it's like I would focus on one thing, get it out, get my feelings expressed, and then I can jump back out again. I didn't have to be in it for long enough time for it to make me feel ill.
And so, like, starting off that more discursive way of writing, which you had done, you know, in sort of in the same vein as the kind of scientific thinking and documenting beforehand, that actually wasn't helpful and actually was counterproductive. It was making you feel more ill doing like a paragraph. But then when you came to write it as a poem, that gave you the ability to dip in and out, to actually modulate your exposure to the difficult material and find a way to express it. What's coming to mind for me is, I feel like I'm asking a leading question. Maybe it is, maybe I'm wrong about it, but one of the things with poetry, and I don't understand poetry well, I have to confess, but is that you can say so much in a very short space because of how it kind of encapsulates an experience. Is that something of that ability to I was going to say titrate. I don't know if you're familiar with that
Mhm.
word. So for in case you haven't heard that word, this is of course you are, you're a chemist. So you know, maybe you can explain it. You'll explain it much better than me. Uh, Titration.
Like just slowly. Um,
But like that drip.
yeah, the drip. Yeah.
So it's just like this drip into a solution, just tiny bits at a time, so that you don't overwhelm, in a trauma perspective, you don't overwhelm the system.
Mhm.
But that, how much you could express with the poetry in a small dose, in a way. That's what I'm wondering. Is that something which you
I,
experienced as you?
there were two components. One is
Yeah.
like, yeah, the drip, the titration aspect of it. The other is in poetry, good poems are written from the heart, right? So again, I couldn't use my logical brain because when I was writing, trying to document my process
Yeah.
through writing paragraphs, I felt like I was really in my head again. But with poetry, I was more looking for metaphors. I was
Yes.
looking for things to connect my experience with. And a lot of times, my metaphors are mostly about nature. So, in a way, I was connecting my feelings to this metaphorical thing out in nature. And it wasn't anything heady. I wasn't using my brain to do that. So, that connection. So, healing trauma, you have to do three things: get back the connection to yourself, get back the
Yeah.
connection to nature, and connect with your community. And poetry, in a way, it sort of allowed me to do two things at once: connect with myself and connect with nature at the same time. So I feel like that's why it
Mm.
was very useful to me.
Yeah. So did can you say a little bit about how your understanding of, if you're happy to share about it, your trauma, how that evolved as you developed this relationship to poetry, to yourself, to nature?
For
How
sure.
how that evolved? Yeah.
So because I opted to not go the medication route, I had a very strict diet. I had a very strict healing practice. And basically, trauma healing became my full-time job.
Yeah.
And some of the things I did were things like breath work, mindfulness, yoga, nature walks, exercise, neurofeedback, biofeedback. So all of those, if you think about it, trauma healing practice is actually spiritual practice. And doing this work actually put me in touch with that true self that's inside of us, with our soul. And through poetry, my soul started to speak to me. My intuition started to speak to me. Um, so yeah, so through that work, because it's a spiritual work, it really benefited my creativity as well. It almost gave a boost to my creative process as well.
Mhm.
And that's how I was able to write over 100 poems in a couple of years. And being a new poet, some of my poems actually got published in journals and articles and um, magazines, which is really, I was really happy about it because
Yeah.
before then I had barely dipped my toes into poetry. And it was just a very rewarding thing that came out of all of that work. It was very, very, very heavy work and difficult, but what came out of it was very rewarding.
Yeah. So you had this. I mean, in a way, the first question was about a time when your creativity really flowed. I mean, in a way, you answered the second question as well with that one, because it was such a challenging time, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, one of the things which I feel for myself is so important is that we don't have to measure ourselves by the success, the metrics that are normally used when we're thinking about how to come about with what is really creative for us, what creativity means for us, and how we do it. And your experience, which you've shared, it sounds like the rug was swept completely out from under you.
Mm.
And that actually somehow you found your way to something which sounds really incredibly rich now. I'm wondering how it's actually changed your life now at this point? You know, having come through some of, or maybe all of what was going on for you, having come through that and
Mhm.
having had this journey with poetry and how it's how you're experiencing it now.
I have to be honest with you, I'm not 100% better. I'm 1,000 times better, but healing is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So luckily, now I've been able to get back to work. I've been able to do my personal responsibilities. Um, but that energy that got created during the process of healing has stayed with me,
Yeah.
and it has changed my life completely. In a way that poetry has actually become my dominant.
Yeah.
It's something that I actually prioritize in my life, and it's a path that I want to continue to pursue. Hopefully full time in the future. Um, that's that's the energy that has stayed during this whole time, and I feel very strongly that I that's how I found my purpose in life.
And so when you say you're prioritizing it, you're back at work, I'm assuming doing something which is not poetry right now. Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. So how do you prioritize it? How do you actually fit that into your day? I mean, just in practical terms, how do you do that? What does that look like?
In order to prioritize my poetry, I've had to set very strong boundaries with myself and others, um, about committing myself to
Yeah,
things. I live in a big city, so I don't have the luxury of, sitting, meditating all day and just being creative. I wish I could do that, but it's the reality of living in an urban setting
yeah.
and having to make a living. But there are ways of learning to say no, practicing to really nurture your alone time, and solitude, protecting your solitude so that you're protecting that your energy and time that are finite and so precious.
So it's really elevating it up your list and actually putting that before and guarding against things which encroach against that.
Exactly. And having something to prioritize in your life makes it easier to say no to things that don't really serve you.
Yeah,
Whereas when I didn't have that, it was a lot easier for me to say yes when wanted to say no. But
yeah,
now, because I have this and it's so important to me, it's easier for me to let go of things that aren't serving me.
yeah, yeah. So it really acts as a kind of clarity. And I suppose if you put that together with the making decisions from your heart, perhaps that's a good combination. It sounds like
Absolutely.
you got clear on your purpose, you got clear on what you really, really value. And perhaps that gives you a way to, like you say, to say no. And maybe I don't know, maybe even sort of helps you to stand firm in that no, perhaps.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I've noticed that change in me, the confidence I have when I say no. No is a complete sentence on its own. I don't need to
yeah,
bring up excuses. I don't need to feel bad or guilty about it. So it's been a really positive change in my life.
yeah. It, just going back a little bit, you also said, you know, you're loads better, but you're not there yet, wherever there is. And I sort of wonder if that's actually not just generally a much more helpful way way to view things. Excuse me, whether we're recovering from a challenge or not. Um, uh, as you said it, I was just like, because that way we have room to grow always. You know, if we actually, excuse me, I'm just about to cough. If we actually are there, we can't grow anymore. You know,
I agree.
and it sounds like what's happened through this is that life has got much richer for you. And
Yes. And it was something so unexpected. This is just
yeah,
something that came out of a true adversity. And I had no idea this is where I would be, you know, back to being healthy. I did mention that I'm not fully better, but I've never felt so healthy, so light, so peaceful in my life. Yes, I still struggle with sleeping once in a while. That's the main thing that is remaining, my sleep.
Mhm.
But everything else, all the feelings that I was experiencing in my body, those are all gone. And there's this sense of peace where agony used to reside before. And it is just such a serene place to be.
Amazing. I have a curiosity, which is, has your relationship to science changed?
Even though I was trained to be a scientist, I always knew there was magical things that science wasn't able to explain.
Hmm.
Um, so when it comes to science, even the greatest scientists like Einstein, they've talked about this thing that science isn't able to explain or explain yet. Um, so I feel like true scientists are also spiritual people, because they understand that there's magic. There's things that science hasn't answered yet.
Okay, so you already had that going on for you, which sounds like you had kind of both sides, the spirit and the science going on at once.
Yes, yes.
How do you feel when you look at how science is used? Do you have a sense that's more widespread than perhaps I might think, or is it something which you feel could come in more, that sort of more balanced view?
Um, I think there's good things. There's definitely good things about science. I mean, science relies on evidence, relies on data.
Yeah,
Uh, so with things that we can um, see and measure, science is amazing because it gives us so much um, to sort of analyze in a way that's objective.
yeah,
But for the things that you can't measure or see, that's where science lacking, and that's where the arts come in, and the whole like balance between science and arts is so important. And in my everyday job, I own a tutoring company that
uh-huh.
helps students overcome their academic challenges. And I always emphasize the importance of both science and the arts. I really want students to not just focus on science because it pays the bills, but also nurture the side of them that's creative, that is often comes from the unseen.
Yeah, and I think for me that's one of the most important principles of how I understand creativity is that it arrives suddenly. Where did that come from? Where did that fantastic idea? Where did that inspiration? Where it has to come from outside the system we're in.
Yes.
So you know, cultivating a sort of a shape that we occupy that can allow that seems to me to be very, very important. And on the bigger picture, I mean, you weren't expecting this experience. It came out of nowhere, and you know, you've taken it and done something very, very beautiful with it, which sounds really, really very enriching in your life. I,
Yes.
sorry, were you going to say something? Did you want to add something?
No,
So
I was
yeah,
gonna
go on.
say, um, what I had going for me was my determination and my courage um, to face the challenges of life directly. So to look life right in the eyes, not run away, not distract myself, to actually try to overcome adversities and struggles. And I think that's what saved me at the end, because even though it was a terrible time, that determination, that courage to not numb myself or distract myself from what was going on and just focusing on healing. I believe that played a huge role
Mm.
how things turned out.
So in those moments which I imagine you had where there was loss of hope, or maybe there wasn't. Maybe there wasn't in maybe your determination was enough fuel. I mean, maybe you could say a little bit about those very, if you're comfortable, obviously, those really, really dark moments about how you managed that.
I read the book Power of Now
Oh yeah.
during that time. As sick as I was, I skimmed through it just to help me with what was going on. And even being in the now, even that second of being in that now was terrible because I felt so sick. And I remember I was coming back from Toronto from a business meeting, and it was the first time in my life that I thought if the plane crashes, I wouldn't be sad. That was the darkest place I've gone to in my life. But for some reason, something kept saying, I'm going to get better.
Mhm.
It's going to be okay. And I didn't know what that meant. But because it was the only thing I had to go on, I decided to hold on to that. I decided to treat that as something sacred that I'm not going to let go of, no matter how bad things get. And things
Yeah.
got really bad. I had to go to the hospital multiple times. And for somebody from outside looking in, I don't, things might have been very dire, but for me, there was this part of me that said, it will get better. Hang on, sit tight, things will get better. And I don't know where that came from, to be honest with you.
Mm.
I'm not sure where that came from, but it was there.
Yeah. I have one more question, which is if you had a piece of advice, and maybe it doesn't apply, but I'd still like to ask it. If you had one piece of advice that you could give your younger self to help you support you in this creative expression or whatever you want to call it, what would
Mhm.
that be?
For an advice to be useful to the receiver, I think it's really important for the receiver to be ready for that advice. And I think our readiness for an advice comes from our level of consciousness, our our level of maturity, and what we've already learned through lived experience. And thinking back to my younger self, I've learned so much in this last 3 years, and I've embodied all that wisdom. But if I was to give an advice to my younger self who hadn't been through this, I think the best she could have done is to grasp the advice through an intellectual level, through her intellect. And I don't think she would have been able to really use the advice in a way that was meant for her. So, knowing that, instead of giving her advice, I really want to send her gratitude. I want to send her compassion and appreciation that again she looked life directly in the eyes. She didn't run away, she didn't give up. She stayed right there and dealt with what was going on. And that's why I'm here today. So I'm actually really grateful. I have a lot of love for my younger self that chose that path, so that now I can be here and feel healthy.
What a beautiful, beautiful answer. Thank you. Mehrnaz, how can people find you if they want to find out more about your work and connect with you?
For sure. I am on Instagram these days, and my handle is Mehrnaz Bassiri, my name. I'll
I'll
make
be
sure you
putting that in the.
can in the
Sorry, go ahead.
description.
You can.
I'll sure to give you my handle so that you can put it in the
Yeah.
description to find me.
Yeah, I'll do that. So that will be below once this goes up. And really, just to end, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience of creativity and how it's enriched and enlivened you. And really, I just want to say thank you for being.
Thank you for having me, Simon.